Excited to talk to you about our topic today, which is going to be about literature reviews. My name is Anita, and with my co-host here, Danielle Hart. We're from the Howe Writing Center. I'm from the English department in composition and rhetoric. Danielle, you're welcome to talk a little bit more about literature.
Yep, I'm in literature, so just letting you know that because a lot of these literature reviews do kind of depend on the field you're coming from, but we do want to give some general advice for how to start constructing these kind of things.
So please feel free to put some questions in the chat. If something is really, a burning question for you, feel free to interrupt us, but, we'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well. Let's see. Is it going to let me do this? There we go. So just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. Hi, welcome, introductions. We're going to just kind of talk about writing in graduate school, give an overview of critical inquiry report, thesis, seminar papers, talk about their purpose and the process by which we produce them, and just give some general overviews of where these steps come up. So the literature review is not just a report on how one fits into existing scholarship about like a specific topic, but it's a way to develop and sharpen your own ideas by closely analyzing existing scholarship about like a specific topic. So we're going to be talking about that process and about how that might apply across different disciplines, right? And then just give some tips and resources, and certainly talk about how the Howe Writing Center can be a resource for you as well. So this is the rhetorical triangle. It's something that may be familiar to some of you, it may not be, but this is something that we refer to when we're talking about what a specific writer is doing to writing to a specific audience with a specific purpose in mind. So for example, like Danielle and I and us at the Howe Writing Center as the writers developed this PowerPoint, which is our text, for the purpose of kind of demystifying the process of writing a literature review for other grad students, right? Our audience, Miami grad students, in order to talk about what a lit review does and the structure and conventions that it can follow. But grad school in particular kind of adds an extra layer to each of these things in this writing rhetorical triangle. Because in grad school, the writer is also a student, so somebody who is understood by the fact that they're still learning, right? And thus our ongoing learning is still being assessed, like in contrast to a minted scholar who's, already kind of finished the process, has publications, and their research is evaluated by their peers in the field already. But this is an important distinction because some of the work of the literature review is to prove your credibility by showing that you've done your homework and know the scholarship, and also by showing how you understand that existing scholarship, which is hopefully in like a critically engaged, not just kind of passing and accepting superficial way, but really dives into that conversation. So what this means is a lit review written by students for professors or for your advisor or your committee. Needs to usually be more explicit and thorough than it does if it were written by a scholar who, for other scholars and whose credibility kind of already precedes them. And like just a general gesture is sufficient. For students, when your ongoing learning is part of what you're writing, is meant to give greater attention focused on the critical engagement involved in these syntheses. You can't just rely on assuming that your critical engagement with a body of research and scholarship, your job is to prove it. So therefore here your purpose is performing your learning. So your audience is not just your fellow scholars, as it will be in your scholarly like monographs, but more specifically your professor, your advisor, your committee, who in order to assess your course performance or your level of knowledge of the field needs to evidence that you've been thorough and thoughtful in your research into how other scholars have approached this topic. So in this way, it's important to remember that your purpose in grad school writing is twofold. Most largely, and I'm just going to read from the slide here, it's to advance knowledge, right, for ourselves, for the field, and for society writ large. It's to realize and articulate new ideas, to enter and to add to an ongoing conversation, and to share what we've learned from our research, right, so that others can build on it, and so that change makers more broadly can act change, right? The work that we do affects things like policy and procedures and practice across different contexts. But when we add this extra layer, right, of being a graduate student and being in graduate school in order to perform your learning, it's not just to explore an idea, but it's to show really clearly to your instructors, your professors, your committee, that you're really deeply engaged with the existing scholarship, right? So it's to perform our learning. So therefore, to whom do we write in graduate school? That's also twofold. Your peers, right? You're a burgeoning scholar. You're inserting yourself into scholarly conversations. And to your professors so that they can assess and continue to support your learning as well. So this means that in work like the literature review, you're both proving your expertise to your professors and showing yourself as a legitimate member of this larger field. Your value as a thinker, that you're willing to take a critical approach to your field of inquiry in an attempt to make new knowledge. So this is something that applies across all different disciplines.
Inquiry in an attempt to make new knowledge, okay?
So finally, we're going to talk about just the general overview of the features of what we write in graduate school. So when we're writing to explain and develop our thinking to our peers, our writing needs to do a few things. We need to have a professional tone. We can assume some knowledge, but we still have to provide context. We can use some jargon and specialized language because our audience will know what that is. But it needs to provide details, right? Not just general gestures like you would be able to do if you were already an established scholar. Your claims need to be specific and show specific evidence, right? So what we mean here by credibility, right? Our quality of being trusted. You may have heard the term ethos. That's like your specific experiences, values, and methods that trust emerges from, right? You've shown that you've done your homework, that you know what the other claims are, that you're not merely repeating what somebody else has said, but you're really engaged in that scholarly conversation in your field. And then it's also for replication, right? The details that make it possible for someone else to see your results as valid because they can be replicated. You've made your logic, your methods transparent, and this is just as true in the humanities as it is in the sciences, right? This all needs to be clear and accurate. So just kind of very generally as a genre, right, your critical inquiry papers, your theses, your seminar papers for classes follow kind of a general model. Some of you may have heard of the IMRAD model, but most of these critical inquiry papers like start with a general introduction of the topic. They move to a synthesis and review of the literature, which is what we're going to go into more detail about. And then they introduce the specific question, the hypothesis, or the claim you're putting forward. And then in putting forth your own research, you explain the methods, your object of inquiry, complete your analysis. And this does vary by discipline, but generally follows this shape, right? And then in the paper's kind of final moves, you expand your analysis back to show why it matters, right? It can tie back to other literature. It can tie back to literature that you've mentioned in the lit review. But by and large, by the end, you're going to state the implications of your work for the field more generally, right? Why does it matter? What does it tell us? What new knowledge do we now have? And what research maybe needs to be done further? So the literature review section helps you establish the particular field and scholarship you're intervening on, whether to expand that already existing knowledge, to confirm them for new contexts, or maybe to complicate them with new contexts, right? So the question becomes then, how can we succinctly define the work of the literature review? So it's a synthesis and critical analysis of a body of research related to a particular topic or question, right? It can stand alone, like what you might write as you prepare for comprehensive exams, or it can be part of a larger project, right? This is beyond just kind of doing an annotated bibliography, say, which is a different genre. You're really putting all of these texts into conversation with each other to really understand what's being said about your topic of interest in your field. So the purpose of this particular form that we follow is to, one, shed new light on and generate new insights about a specific topic, tell people who may know something in this field, including yourself, something new about the existing literature. It can be current, can be historical, sometimes both, to talk about how scholars have defined and researched certain phenomenon already before you introduce your own argument. It's to define the context for your own research questions, which will ask something new that emerges from this new light that you have put on the existing literature, and to justify that new work. So this justification functions at 3 levels. At the level of the authorial, right, that ethos that we talked about, to tell who you are as a researcher, what you know, and how this knowledge gives you authority to ask these questions. About the originality of the topic, right, to show why your new study is needed, because it hasn't been done before, right? And the so what of the topic, to show how this contributes to the field, not only because it hasn't been done before, but because it fills a certain lack, right? You're filling a gap in the research that needs to happen. So we've been using these terms, right? Synthesis and critical analysis, but what do we mean by these? How do we define them? To synthesize, you may well know, is to bring together into a coherent whole, right? You're gathering scholarship relevant to a specific research topic. And this takes a certain level of discernment, right? And this is the kind of academic and scholarly work that you're doing, pulling it together to show how it delineates certain boundaries about how a specific topic has been explored by previous researchers already to kind of define your area. And then to analyze, we mean to break something down to its component parts, to see what the elements are that combine to allow these arguments to emerge. We can ask lots of questions here, right? Like, what are methods? What are objects of study? What elements are considered? What elements are ignored? What theoretical frameworks are used? How are terms defined? What conclusions are drawn? What are stated implications for the field, right? And these all vary across these different disciplines. But we should also keep in mind here that we're performing a critical analysis, which means that we add the lens of value. What value do these contributions have? Why and how are they relevant, meaningful, important? If a study on the effects of whole language teaching on second graders, like for instance, doesn't account for like the parents' education level, does that diminish the value of this study? How so? Does it make this study somehow incomplete? Are you filling a gap then, right? You're just bringing kind of a little bit of that judgment level there. So what is the purpose of the synthesis and critical analysis? And it's 3 things. to show commonalities among discrete pieces of scholarship. So, something like many researchers agree that this phenomenon is true. It's to show the relevant differences between studies and research frameworks and how they can be broken down into varied elements. That's the analysis, right? So, this scholar, however, may use a different set of methods, that sort of rhetorical move. And then 3, to evaluate which of these commonalities and differences are most relevant for your interests as a researcher. That's that critical part, that critique. So this method reveals something that I'm going to then extend on. But of course, sometimes this work of synthesis, analysis, and critique can overlap, right? These are not all just kind of like distinct component parts. We're doing all of this work within a literature review. Synthesizing in itself is a critical act. We are choosing what to include and what to exclude. And then analysis is a synthetic act because it not only breaks things down, it encourages us to make these new connections across different objects of study, which is something that you want to demonstrate as a grad student. And then some studies may share methods, right, that you synthesize, but they might ask different specific research questions. Your research question may be different. And then some scholarship may ask similar questions, but define terms differently, or take up different objects of study, or use similar theoretical frameworks, but arrive at conclusions with like vastly different implications than yours. Your job is to identify these themes and patterns and intersections and divergences and to speak to which of these are relevant, valuable, or need updating, improvement, expansion, and revision. This is where you're inserting yourself, your study into those conversations. So like one thing I've always found useful is to think about these as varied rhetorical moves, I'm comp ret, so that we can make, which has been really usefully summed up by a model that Danielle is gonna give some more details on, called John Swale's CARS model.
So you may have heard of Swale's CARS model before. If you're not familiar with it though, in the Google Drive folder I shared, I actually have a copy of the article and you're welcome to read that, but I'm just gonna quickly go over some of the main points of it. So CARS stands for Create a Research Space. So the first 2 of these replicate the work that we do in literature reviews. So number 1, establishing territory. So this is by claiming centrality or putting your research in the center of established research. So kind of identifying where your research fits into this. So recently, a host of researchers have investigated XYZ. And or making topic generalizations. So making statements about current knowledge or practices in your field. So if you're in education, teachers commonly struggle to. And number 2, establishing a niche. So by indicating a gap in the research, show how the current research either doesn't attend to an issue, so designers have not addressed how, or question raising. So suggesting additional research based on previous research. Oops, sorry, could you go back one slide? The third one is continuing a tradition, so showing how one's research extends existing research. So you could do any and all of these in your own article, in your own literature review. So the final move of the CARS model established is occupying a niche, which is done by 1, outlining your purpose. So make sure to be clear what you're doing in that paper. Announcing present research, so saying that your paper will draw on a certain study or prior research, and indicating the structure of what you're doing. So I begin by doing this, then I'll do this, finally I'll do this. So this makes it very clear to the reader the trajectory of your project. Swales explains why, as we'll talk about next, writing the introduction to your lit review or your seminar paper is often the most difficult part, because here you're working out how to see yourself fitting into this larger field of scholarship, how you evaluate and read that scholarship, and how your work contributes to that field. So we have a visualization here of the CARS model, and also in our folder we have a handout of this both in a doc format and a PDF format. So definitely we encourage you after this session to fill this out with your own research. So this image gives an overview of the lit review section of a critical inquiry or a seminar paper, and it's generally organized starting with the background on the top. This is what Swales calls establishing a territory, again, so the scope of the specific field you're investigating. And the general question that is driving your research. So how have researchers explained the failure of whole language pedagogies in second grade literacy education, to review, or to return to that example Anita used. So the literature review following that in this middle section here is where you zero in more specifically on this territory, or again, as Swales puts it, establishing your specific niche. So here you'll provide background that will help your readers understand your research as important, the so what, and as responding to an obvious problem in the literature. So this will require you to discuss the research that's already been done related to your big question. So for example, this could be what has been discovered so far, what questions or discrepancies remain that you are addressing in your study, what hasn't been studied previously or a gap in the research, and why does your study matter? And ideally, this should lead to your own specific hypothesis, claim, or goal for future research, both at the level of process, so doing the lit review will help you sharpen up these ideas, and at the level of structuring your paper. So doing the lit review will help the reader believe your claim is valid and important, and it makes your work more persuasive as an argument. So before you do a lit review, you might well have a sense of what this claim or hypothesis is, but you might not yet know its specifics. And again, definitely feel free to look in our folder to try to fill this out yourself after this session. So when you're preparing to write the literature review, there are several key steps that you should be taking. So the first, gathering. So this can be gathering research, gathering notes about your research, distilling or note-taking. This is creating a summary in your own words. So critically reading your research. You can select your sources by justifying their importance to what you're doing, why they're relevant, and making a summary about these. The next step would be analyzing. So this is after you've done your research and you're reviewing your notes. You can compare and evaluate sources, identify relationships between them and to your study, look for trends or gaps in the research, questions that have been unanswered, and you can add these ideas into your notes or into a new document. And finally, synthesizing, put these sources in conversation with one another. So none of these exist in the void. They're all speaking towards the same topic. So you can organize these and outline them in several different ways, but we'll give you some strategies for how to do this. But an important thing to do is just because you've analyzed something or synthesized your sources once, this is a continuous process. So you're likely going to be analyzing things again, synthesizing things again throughout the writing process. So we can think of these critical analyses in a variety of different ways. We can ask these of individual pieces of scholarship. So what are the main theoretical frameworks? And you can consider how you might critique this. What are the methods, quantitative, qualitative, etc. How might you critique them? What might some alternate methods be? What are some objects of study variables under consideration? And then again, what might be some alternate or overlooked objects of study? And finally, what are its main themes and conclusions? And what are alternate conclusions? So we can ask these questions also of the scholarship in the aggregate. So all of your scholarship together. So whether, there are patterns here, what are the main shared theoretical frameworks? So are they all, using these same theoretical frameworks, and what is the value here for your own research question? Are there any shared methods, and what's the value for yours? And what are the main common or shared objects of study or variables under consideration? And finally, any shared themes or conclusions. So one thing I found when analyzing and synthesizing all of your sources is to make a matrix. So what this looks like is a table broken out by specific topics or concepts. So You can see on the left-hand side here some potential topics for your research. They don't have to be these, but on the top you can see that you can list your different studies. So this is just kind of a way to visualize and keep track of your research and how they are all discussing these common themes. And we have a handout again on that in our folder too. And here we have a copy of a matrix that is filled out. So this is organized by different ways you might analyze and critique the scholarship. So the research here is about themes and research about PhD students. So you can see we have some common topics that are appearing in the research, and then 3 sources that are addressing these. And you might notice that in the first column, there is the Hamburg source, doesn't actually mention social learning in PhD student communities, so you can just make a note of that in your matrix. But these are a very helpful way to kind of organize your thoughts if you're more of like a visual person. So writing the lit review requires a lot of planning, time, and rewriting, as you can see. So definitely expect to revise a lot. No one gets it right the first or second or third time. This is something we emphasize in the Writing Center all the time. The more you revise, the better you'll understand your topic and be able to write about your topic. And this is true for beginners and experts in the field. So models of good writing. So I have these things called thinking bundles, and you can also see we have a handout on there in our folder. So thinking bundles and this link here to the academic phrase bank. So these are really just ways that you can express the research you've been doing. So for example, they have, if you're thinking about the literature you've read, they have some phrases you could insert into your own writing to kind of discuss them, such as a large and growing body of literature has investigated, numerous scholars have argued that, in this study, XYZ, so just different ways of discussing the research. And you're more than welcome to go through those and use those in your own work. So finally, the thing that we emphasize the most, and we want to talk about in regards to the Writing Center, feedback. So one of the most important things is to get feedback from others, but we also encourage feedback from a variety of sources. So professors, for their professional opinion, peers for their honest opinion and their support, and also because they're also, just like you, the future of this discipline and may be attuned to issues that your professors haven't thought about yet. And lastly, Writing Center consultants. And these can be undergrad and graduate consultants, could also be very helpful, and they are trained to look at this kind of stuff. So we want to briefly just talk about how to make an appointment with us if you're interested. So because of COVID this year, we are doing things a little differently with our appointments. Rather than having face-to-face appointments in the library, we are having 2 different kinds of online appointments. So the first is synchronous online, and that's kind of like what we're doing now. You'll be in a video chat with a consultant, and you can go in and discuss a draft, or you can even just go in and brainstorm if you'd like. We're doing a pilot right now of that, so there may be a few less live online consultations available, but it's definitely something good if you want to talk to somebody one-on-one. Our other option is written online feedback, and this is where you would fill out a form about what kind of feedback you're looking for. And then you would have a consultant go through your draft, go through what you're looking for, and write you up a letter giving you some feedback on your draft. So this is asynchronous. You wouldn't actually be meeting with the writer directly, but this is a really good option if you're looking for very specific feedback on a draft. Yes, so we want to leave some time if anybody has any questions, and also to show how to create an account with us. Oh, yes, and Anita just posted the link here. So you do have to create an account in order to schedule an appointment, but once you have the account, and make sure to use your Miami email address for that if you haven't made one yet. Yeah, and we can absolutely provide the link for that. And then when you are on there, they have a big schedule, and you can just click, the available times. So we're going to open it up for questions and discussions. Does anybody have any questions about what we've gone over?
Hi, I just had a question about the resources. Will these be available to us on the GSA Canvas site? I was searching and I couldn't find it. I may have searched the wrong thing too. That's quite possible.
So we don't have access to including things on the GSA Canvas site, I don't believe, but I can definitely send them along
Okay.
to have them post them on there. Yeah, no
Or,
problem.
or where could we find them? Are they on the How site? Or?
So let's see. If you joined late, I did include a link
Sorry.
to Google Drive. No. And here, there's a copy of our presentation as well as some of the handouts we were referencing, as well as the Swells article.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And the question, when would be the last day you can make an appointment? We usually have them up until finals week. So our schedule usually is a little bit different during finals week, but there will be people available then.
So I'm going to take just a moment to share my screen again, just to give you a quick little walkthrough of the How Writing Center's website and where to click to make an appointment. So I provided the link in the chat, but miamioh.edu/hcwe/hwc/appointments, right? It's going to get you to this page and you can just click schedule appointment. If you have not already created your login credentials, it will ask you to do so. But once you have, again, you can register for an account before you have. Once you have, and then make sure that you use your Miami email credentials to do so. I'm going to click here, schedule for written online, since we have more of those appointments available. And as Danielle mentioned, you can send your paper in, receive it back with a report of feedback and some comments in the margin and that sort of thing. And then you'll be taken to the scheduling page, and you can see we have undergrad writing consultants, we have graduate student consultants. As Danielle mentioned, everybody's trained in the same way to look at your paper and to give feedback. And then you can just click on an open cell in order to create an appointment, to create a new appointment. And we're just going to ask some general questions, but more largely, if you can explain your project in your own words to your writing consultant and be very specific about what kind of feedback and where you want your feedback, they can give you the best help possible. And then you just kind of go all the way down and create your appointment. And then once you're ready for your appointment, you come right back here and click on your cell again. Are there any questions about the Writing Center process and how to make an appointment?
Or any lingering questions about lit reviews too?